All right. Welcome to session 3 of Reclaiming Patriotism. This session is from the classroom to the country. And this is where we're going to look at education as we position it as the catalyst for a civic revolution, inspired by students, bold teaching, and engaged citizens that shape a new American future. And I really do mean that last part, a new American future. If you are joining, thank you. If you are new to joining, thank you. If you are a returner, welcome back. I'm glad to have you all. The recording of this session will be made available at the conclusion of it. And I try to send out a document that includes all of the documents that I cover in the session, as well as videos that'll help your understanding of what it is that I've tried to put together for you all as we talk about this idea of reclaiming patriotism. And again, we do not do so in the midst of being blinded by the beauty of the possibilities that our country possesses. We do so with the understanding of the reality of what this country has meant to a lot of us, and how we have been excluded by quite a few instances of this country. My name is Ivory Kennedy Jr. I'm glad that you are all joining me today. Where you are is with the Institute for Common Power. So we are the educational arm. We offer lectures online, just like the one that you are in. I have a couple links to drop in the chat for you all to join some of our upcoming events. One happening this Sunday, and then another series happening later in the month of February. So we are the educational arm. If you are an educator or if you're interested in the history of this nation, we take educators and other folks down south to Georgia and Alabama to go where the history happened and to hear from the people who were actually in there. Part two of that learning series, I'm sure some of you on the call are returning or getting acclimated from your return from Memphis, Tennessee, as well as various places in Mississippi. So that is part two of what we offer here at the Institute for Common Power. The overarching organization is Common Power, known for its mobilization of voters. And the goal is to seek justice, voting justice across this nation. So if you are not familiar with Common Power or the Institute, please get familiar. I will have a couple links again to some of the events that we have going on. I wanted to share with you, again, these are some of the images. These numbers are outdated for good reason because we've had more learning tours that have happened, more participants, and more educators that go, again, where that history happened and then facilitate that, right? So think about it. If we have more than 130 educators, 130 educators, multiply, let's just say 80 students per educator, right? Now, me and math broke up in high school, so I can't do that quick math, but the impact that we have by just sharing the truth, right? The impact that we have by getting the message out there, the impact that we have by sharing the history and the truth of our country. And then, as promised, here are the events that are happening. So the first one is going to be a national teach-in. Okay, so this is going to be talking about the Montgomery bus boycott and how that changed everything. If I'm not mistaken, we might be altering, that one might be altered for talking about what's happening right now with modern day ICE practices. So I might be corrected on that one. Check out that link, and I'll try to make sure I get that by the time we end here. And then the second one is Reclaiming Democracy, led by our fearless leader, Dr. Terry Ann Scott, who is the director of the Institute for Common Power. So today, what are we going to be doing this evening? What is it that we are going to be experiencing this evening? So the session agenda is a welcome and intro. We just did that. We're going to go over current events very briefly. I want to do a detailed review of session 1 and 2, talk about the impact of education, and then my favorite question, so what, now what? So what, we are in the midst of everything that we can imagine, and maybe some of this is unimaginable. Now, what do we do about it, though? I like to always end with that question of now what? What is it that we do as we move forward? What is our civic responsibility? What is our civic duty as we move forward in this country? So take a look at some of the current events. I'll let you read for a second. Now, I always try to do a local, state, federal, and global a local, state, federal, and global example of current events. Nothing really pressing in Ohio other than what we're going to be talking about that's involved in this session. But I found it very interesting that as we talk about the impact of schools and how they serve as catalysts, as a bedrock of what could be a catalyst for a movement. In New Hampshire, the education chair advocated in a signal chat. There was a leak in a signal chat for a whites only school. Today's schools are almost, if not more, segregated than they were when segregation was legal. In Fulton County, the FBI did a raid on their election office, and that is in connection to the 2020 election. Now, why do I bring that up? The current president continues to talk about, excuse me, continues to talk about the irregularities of the election of 2020, or the cheating and all of the falsehoods that are surrounding that. However, in different states, Oklahoma is one in particular. They have moved forward with changing their state standards for education, for social studies, that outline that they need to talk about the irregularities of the 2020 election as if it is disputable. So again, no matter where you are logging in from, I encourage you, and hopefully by the end of this session, we'll talk a little bit more about how to do that. But everybody needs to be aware of the things that are happening. Social study standards are being changed. Policy is being pushed that is not necessarily representative of the truth. And we all need to be aware of that, because what are we going to leave our children? There are calls for a national shutdown tomorrow. I seen a couple reports about this, and this is all in response to what is happening in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Tom Homan, the director of, I believe, ICE or Border Security, has been sent to Minnesota to do whatever it is that he is going to do. Obviously, this is in the wake of the murder of Alex Preddy and then Renee Nicole Good in Minnesota. So keep an eye out on that. And then I just found this interesting. As we are in a global shift of some sorts, China fired their top general because there was some sharing of nuclear secrets from China's perspective to us. So we might have been the beneficiaries of some of that. Again, current events is meant for you all to just orient yourselves. I encourage all of you to always think about what are the current events going on at the local, state, federal, and global level, and how will they impact us. All right. So America 250, right? We are in the midst of the anniversary of our nation. Right? America is turning 250 years old on July 4th of this year. It gives us the perfect opportunity. It gives us the perfect opportunity to examine where we were, how we had gotten to that point to write that Declaration of Independence in the first place, and how far have we come with actualizing and truly attaining what was outlined in that document, the document that sets us free from oppression, essentially. And again, this is not to be blinded by the United States of America. This is not to be blinded by the history of this country. This is the truth, right? This is the opportunity for us to look at the truth. Where were we as a nation 250 years ago? Those of us on this call might have an idea. Some of us exactly know all of what was happening, right? Per the documents that have been left for us to sift through, those primary and secondary sources. But the question becomes about education. What does this mean for the moment of education that we sit in? What does this mean for the moment that we have? Okay, what does this mean for the moment that we have? I want to kind of orient, because I'm not sure if I've echoed this enough, right? My first learning tour with the Institute for Common Power was February of 2024. I got wind of this organization online. I fell in love. I couldn't believe the work that was being done, and I needed to be a part of that. I needed to get the experience. So this image is of the cohort that I attended with. And in the middle, you can see Mr. Charles. You can see Dr. Bernard Lafayette and his wife, Miss Kate, and their family. Okay. And these are educators from all over the country. In the midst of all that has happened, I reflect back on a conversation that was had. Okay. And this, I believe this was one of the first nights. And correct me if I'm wrong if any of you are on the call tonight. But I believe this was one of the first conversations that we had had. And we were from all different places. We had only met on a Zoom call twice before we met in person. And the conversation came up about what does it mean to be an American? What is patriotism? And a lot of us were grappling and sharing our stories about how we felt, about how we had felt marginalized, the ways in which we were upset with the country, lots of conversations. And I pushed the idea about patriotism because, again, I've shared with you all the past two sessions. I struggled myself to have a sense of pride about being an American because I didn't see where I fit in this story other than being oppressed and not having the things that were outlined in those documents that I hold so dear because all of the answers are there, in my opinion. Okay. But again, we had this conversation, and this is a diverse group of teachers sharing our journeys, sharing how education has impacted us. And I challenged them, which is what I challenge all of you to do tonight, and then to challenge your family members, right? Start at the dinner table, challenge your peers, challenge your community, challenge your coworkers, challenge everyone to think about what really makes up this country and who are the true patriots. Who are the true patriots of the time? Okay. And going back to the definition, okay, the definition of patriotism is love or devotion to one's country. That does not mean blindly. It does not mean blindly. And we might struggle to love this country. Okay. We might struggle to love this country. However, it is not what has been done. Give me 1 second. Sorry, the little one is home. So I want us to be very clear, okay? It is not about what has been done, right? Because we can analyze the country, we can dig deep and go through all of the hard times, and we should hold our history accountable. But what we have to do, right? What we have to do is have the mindset of what patriotism can mean for the future. Not just for ourselves, not just for our children, but for the future of the nation and what anybody that comes after what we do, what we decide to do with our time here now, what they will inherit. All right. So again, this is not about being blind. This is not about loving this country blindly. I love this country because I can see where my impact could be because of what has happened prior to my existence. And I hold that near and dear because I feel like that's my duty. All right. So the session review, okay, session number one. We went over the ideals of freedom and democracy, okay, that founded this nation. It wasn't about politics or party per se, but it was about the demand for liberty and justice for all. Was that an exclusionary sentence when it was written? Absolutely. But it is 2026, and we have to be the ones that claim and make our stakes to that claim today. And we should do so proudly, honestly, and truthfully. Session two, last week we talked about the foundation of white supremacy and how it is kind of rhyming with the modern times that we are facing today. We talked about groups like Moms for Liberty and how they are the rhyme or the echo of what the Daughters of the Confederacy laid out for generations to come. And I have a video to kind of reference where we might be and what we're dealing with today. We also talked about the Confederacy itself in their secession document, that cornerstone speech given by Alexander Stephens, where he outlined that the rightful place of the Negro was subordinate to the white man. Again, I use the phrase the beautiful thing about white supremacy, and maybe I shouldn't have phrased it that way. However, my intent is that the good thing about what they have done in the past is that they documented it for us to use today. And we have to do so because they gave it to us, right? We have to use that as a recipe to call out what we see today that echoes it and then correct it. And then today, and I mean this, I underline the words and I mean that the impact of education and how we use this moment for a movement and a revolution. I'm inspired by Ken Burns' documentary about the American Revolution for the simple fact that it outlined all of what the struggle for liberty was back then. And not only did it outline it, it inspired me because it was the simple idea of freedom from an oppressive government in Great Britain. How do we start a revolution today? How do we lead ourselves to whatever this promised land is that Dr. King is going to talk about in this next video that I'm going to show you? A revolution doesn't have to mean that we are coming to arms. A revolution does not mean that we have to fight one another. When I say the word revolution, I mean that it is time for something new. I feel inspired by the words of Dr. King, and I'll share my story afterward. But I am inspired even today in the midst of the chaos because I believe that there are enough good people here today, enough good people that care about the children of the future that will do something better than what we have done before. This cannot be the best that America has to offer us. I refuse to believe that. I refuse to believe it, and I hope you do too. So, how do we use what we learned today? The impact of education, the foundation of education. How do we use it to start a movement? Because it has to come from the classroom, and that leads to a revolution. And again, this is a revolution that is encompassing for all people, right? I want all children to be able to benefit from what the idea of this country, this experiment, this ongoing experiment. How do we leave it safe, more safe, safer for the next group? I'm going to play this video and we'll talk on the other side.
What we say to America is be true to what you said on paper. Lived in China or even Russia or any totalitarian country. Maybe I could understand some of these illegal injunctions. Maybe I could understand the denial of certain basic First Amendment privileges because they haven't committed themselves to that over there. But somewhere I read of the freedom of assembly. Somewhere I read of the freedom of speech. Somewhere I read of the freedom of press. Somewhere I read that the greatness of America is the right to protest far right. So just as I say we aren't going to let any dogs or water hoses turn us around, we aren't going to let any injunction turn us around. Well, I don't know what will happen now. We've got some difficult days ahead. But it really doesn't matter with me now because I've been to the mountaintop. Oh, my. Like anybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place. I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will. And He's allowed me to go up to the mountain. And I've looked over and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. So I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord.
And we know what happens the next day. He is murdered in Tennessee, Memphis, Tennessee. I think this was last year. I want to say this is last year. Yes, we were actually on a learning tour on King Day, and it was actually inauguration day as well. And we were at the hotel where he was killed. And a little bit after that, I believe it was the same day, we actually got to go to this church where he stood and delivered this last speech. Now, I shared this speech because I was in high school when I first heard of this speech, and my teacher, Mr. Unger, Mr. Unger, he showed us this speech. He didn't say anything, and he asked us what did we think about it, and we all gave our answers. And then he gave us the preface, or then he shared with us that this was the last speech that Dr. King gave, and he was assassinated. And then we listened to it again, and it started to click. Okay, it started to click. Mr. Unger has been teaching for over 50 years. His book sits over my shoulder, called Teach. He's a Vietnam veteran. He's a storyteller and an advocate for public schools and urban youth. He could have retired years ago. I like to say I convinced him to not retire, but he could have stopped long ago. Mr. Unger has inspired students well before me and so many after myself and my classmates. And the reason I bring this up is because all of you on this call hopefully had that one teacher, right? And I want you to think about that one teacher and how much better the world could be if they would have had that person as their teacher. People that struggle to share the ideas of America, how much better would they have understood that America is should be for all of us if they had that one teacher? Mr. Unger is one of the greatest human beings to walk this planet. He is a true educator through and through. He showed us the Emmett Till documentary, and he walked us through the Trayvon Martin situations. And he's the reason why I do current events, because he gave us a sense of belonging, not just in the classroom, but the country. He showed us the things that were happening, and we felt a sense of urgency. Hey, we belong. We need to say something. This isn't right. This isn't right. So the reason I share this is because it is him and his work and his ideals for us as young kids to be able to do what I do today. So again, I want you to think about that one teacher, okay? And maybe you are, I'm sure some of you on this call are that one teacher for your students. All right. So right now, I want to talk about the founding of education, the founding of American education. This is not an exhaustive list. I pulled from the framers and the founders to kind of get their perspective about education before we dig or before we dive a little bit deeper into some of the examples that I have for us. So I want us to think about the founding of school. Where did the idea of education come from? What did it mean to have an educated populace? Why was education so exclusive? Who was only allowed to go to school and who did they try to keep this away from? I've shared with you all the past two sessions that Thomas Jefferson is a very complicated figure in my life. As a president, maybe did some good things. We could argue the expansion of the United States at the cost of those natives and indigenous people that were here before their settlement, right? However, Thomas Jefferson has said some very, very great things over the course of his life, sometimes speaking like a true abolitionist. Okay. This is not to gloss over any of the things that he has done. This is not to to have rosy colored glasses or anything of the sort. Thomas Jefferson, though, believed that education was essential to liberty. He believed that supporting, excuse me, supporting a public school system is what was needed, okay, was what was needed for our government. John Adams, okay, our second president. I kind of have them in a backwards order here. John Adams, the second president, he is going to work to enshrine that public education is in the Massachusetts state constitution. And he argued that education is virtuous, okay? That education is virtuous. It's essential to preserving the rights of liberty and our government. George Washington went a step further. In his farewell address, he talked about the importance of education and hinted at a national standard for education, a national university, if you will, believing that it was going to instill civic values and sustain our republic. Now, if the framers who got together in 1776, put their names to the paper to sign the Declaration of Independence, that go on to set the framework for the Constitution that we operate under, of course, with its amendments from then. If they understood the importance of education for the public, then shouldn't we be echoing those same sentiments today and wrapping our arms around our public institutions, wrapping our arms around public education, holding our legislators accountable for what happens with the policies that impact our public education system? Now, there is no, okay, let me see, the word education, okay, does not appear in the US Constitution. And I asked the question, why? Why do we think that is, right? Now, might be a rhetorical question. I don't ask that question in good faith. I would hint at as to why we know why, okay? But they talked about the importance of education. Imagine for 2 seconds if we invested in public education the way that we do our military, the current budget for ICE, if we invested that much into our public institutions, every student in the United States of America, we make the claim that we are the strongest and powerful, most richest nation on this earth. And yet our public institutions, our public education system is not flourishing the way that it could be. At the end of the day, America is an idea that has been actualized by those that have the power to make things happen. Therefore, I ask the question, what can we do? What more can we do to use what the founders and the framers gave us to our advantage about education? An engaged citizenry that is very well educated, that has the truth at their disposal and uses it to further our country. To me, it sounds easy. It feels like it could be easy. With enough people, I know that it could be. Okay, with enough people, I know that it could be. All right. Now, the one thing that I will say about this, I want us to think about this. We are living in a moment where the argument has been made by the federal administration that education should be left up to the states. All of us educators know that we are bound by the state standards that are pushed by our states. That's easy. Okay. That's easy. We also know and have seen there's an attack on education right now. This school choice, these school vouchers, the idea of using public funds to fund private institutions or charter schools. We are living in the midst of where public education is not being taken care of. And education is a public good, says the founders. How do we argue against what the framers said today as we celebrate 250 years of the United States of America? Those two don't go together. We have to use what they gave us at the founding to further the protection of our public school systems. And I want to make one more point before I move on with the next piece. How are schools funded? Taxes, right? Property taxes. Redlining is a real thing. It is a relic of white supremacy. It is a relic of the Jim Crow era. If the less desirable neighborhoods are insulated and in the middle and don't get enough resources, and then we start to take away and cut and slash state budgets and take away public educational resources, what are we doing for our students? We got to use our voices and we got to stand up and say something. Now we are in the great state of Ohio. Okay, we were a part of this Northwest Ordinance. Okay, and the Northwest Ordinance had three main provisions: expanding the territory of the United States. Again, shout out to Thomas Jefferson. Expanding the territory of the United States. This is going to lead to Ohio's statehood in 1803. It was to set the rules for congressional representation as you have an influx of people wanting to go to this Northwest Territory and set up shop, right? We have different settlers. And then the third one was to craft some sort of Bill of Rights that encouraged education and outlawed slavery. Again, this is 1787, where we are expanding the territory of the United States, where we are looking to both encourage education and outlaw slavery. And I want to share this with you.
Beginning 3 years before the final Confederate surrender, as battles raged across Tennessee, many slaves made the harrowing decision to break their bonds and escape to Union strongholds. In a town like Memphis, controlled by the Union Army, in a town like Nashville, controlled by the Union Army, you see a lot of enslaved people knowing fully what's going on, knowing that if they can get to one of these fortified towns controlled by the Union Army, they will be self-emancipating. They will be free. And so with these camps around the cities of Tennessee, where enslaved people have found refuge, you will see Northern missionaries coming down to these contraband camps, as they were called, specifically to start educating the children and the adults as well.
Most of the ex-slaves were convinced that education had the power. And the reason why was because people in Southern society who were running everything and who had money, they were all educated. And the people who didn't, even white people who didn't have anything and didn't run anything, they weren't educated. So very early on, slaves in their minds linked education and power over one's own life and one's own destiny.
With the help of Northern missionaries, the Freedmen's Bureau, and Black churches, former slaves made impressive strides under the protection of federal Reconstruction policies. Thousands of freedmen were learning to read and write. A handful of these schools would grow into Black colleges, which began to appear across Tennessee as the need for African American teachers intensified.
What has grown into historically Black colleges and universities today began as freedmen schools. And you would see them all across the South, very meager students at various age levels and also achievement levels.
There were people graduating from schools that were called college, but they didn't really have college training. Most of those schools, and Knoxville College is one, for a good while it had a normal school, which is where you graduated teachers, but that was half the training that a college graduate would get.
Black education in the South was overwhelmingly controlled by Northern white missionaries. It was they who had come first. It was they who had given the most materially, those who served as faculty and staff. And it's for that reason that for a very long time, white missionaries got all the credit for the success of Black colleges. I argue that while there is a lot of credit owed to them, there's enough credit to be shared. And so we have to make room for Black self-determination.
Very early on, slaves in their minds linked education and power over one's own life and one's own destiny. For them, getting an education was the same thing as becoming truly free.
In the documentary that Ken Burns published, one of the scholars talked about how the idea of this liberty and freedom that was being talked about and sought after as they are crafting the Declaration of Independence, those enslaved people that were providing the service, the hands that gave the pieces of paper and the ink pens to those who were crafting these ideas on paper. One of the scholars said, "You don't think that people were hearing this word liberty and going into their corners and quarters and talking about, hey, they're talking about this thing called freedom and liberty, right? Education is the power. Education is the power. My grandmother, I believe I've shared this. She was born in Lowndes County. She could not read or write. She wasn't allowed to go to school because of the color of her skin, being born in 1924. So she grew up in those 30s, the late 20s and early 30s. She told us that education is the key. If there was one thing that you were going to do, is it was you're going to go to school and you're going to act right, number one, right? You don't want grandma to get a phone call. Granny Goose is what we called her. Okay. But she even knew and understood the power of education, that if you wanted to go anywhere, it would take you as far as it could, as far as you put in the work. We have to start some sort of movement today that gives these students, that gives the children of our country the understanding that education is not something that should be burdensome, right? Education is what is going to help you maximize whatever it is your potential is. A strong foundation of understanding all the bad things that have happened in this country, okay? A an idea that, okay, if we could have done all of these things with all of these different exclusionary policies, what could we do if we open up the doors to all of our children? What can we do if we radicalize this educational process, not for political purposes, but for them to see the truth about this country? If I am doing something wrong, I hope someone tells me. I would rather you be honest with me so that I can have a chance to fix it and be better for those who will benefit afterward. And we have got to make sure that school, right? We've got to make sure that our history is preserved by teaching it to our students, but the importance of school. These enslaved people did everything that they could to get their hands on books. They would be beaten for it. Some people would be killed for trying to access educational materials because of the value of it. And again, it goes back to what Reverend Dr. Bernice A. King said. Those that risked their lives during the civil rights movement did not do so to divide this country. They did so that they can have a piece of this American dream as well. And we cannot lose sight of the beauty and what that can provide us. We cannot lose sight of that. We can be sad, we can be down, we can be honest about what we see and what we are facing today. But our children and the opportunity for them to learn from this moment connected to all of what we have been through, that inspires them to say, you know what? By the time I'm 18 and graduate, not only am I an educated voter, but I want to be the next city councilman. I want to be the next congresswoman. I want to be a state senator because I want to have control and influence over what happens, right? How many of our children grow up saying that I want to be a representative? I want to be a county commissioner. I want to be an auditor. We've got to make sure that education leads them to the ways in which they can make the most change. And it doesn't have to be a forever thing. But imagine if enough of our children got together to do a little bit of that because they're inspired by education. All right. So really briefly, okay, because of what we are experiencing right now, and I talked about the Ku Klux Klan Act of 71, but I want to talk about the enforcement acts because again, what we are experiencing today. As we come up out of Reconstruction, the Civil War, and we are in the Reconstruction era, where African Americans are being told by the government that we are going to have certain protections, okay? Because by law, being born here, we are entitled to the promises that the Constitution outlines. It is going to make it illegal for groups to conspire or disguise themselves to violate citizens' constitutional rights. Again, using history to our advantage to help further where we are today. It targeted organized racial violence and voter intimidation, opened up investigations, and if there was justification enough, then stronger federal action was taken. Okay. Why am I sharing this? Because again, what are we experiencing today? We have seen the government, maybe not in all aspects, maybe not in every nook and cranny of this country, but on paper, we have been able to get the government to pass things like this. If enough of us today demand that our elected officials and representatives at the local, state, and federal level, if enough of us demand and have had enough, because I have, Okay, and I'll share what I'm doing in my spare time. Okay, but I've had enough. I got to use my voice. My son deserves better. He deserves to grow up in a country that values the people that are here, that values the people that contribute to our country, and values education. Okay, so if we can get legislation like this in the 1870s, and we know how concentrated the power was then, all we have to do is mobilize our feet, use our voices, use our hands. All right. So Horace Mann, okay, Horace Mann, this is going to be kind of our foundation. Okay, this is kind of going to give us the foundation of what we have for our public school system right now. Okay, Horace Mann believed that public school was essential to maintaining a healthy democracy. Okay, and this is in the 1870s. Okay, yes, yes to the comment about AI distorting reality. Absolutely, absolutely. And feel free to drop things in the chat. I might not get to that in the midst of me talking, but I hopefully will end giving us enough time to have a decent discussion. Because again, I'm not one that just wants to talk at you all. How do we come
Oh,
together with ideas to figure this out?
hold
Okay.
on. Sorry.
All right. So, believing public schools are essential to maintaining a healthy democracy, okay, not just teaching academics. Again, I agree, right? We have to use these old documents to make our case today because I don't think when they wrote this kind of stuff, they thought that a multiracial generational group like us would get together and be using what they put down on paper to say, hey, yeah, we're just trying to achieve this American dream that was laid out way back when, right? So this common school idea, the idea was that it was going to create a moral and civic minded group of citizens. We need that. Reducing social conflict. Do we need that more than ever today, given what we are experiencing? Okay, and the cognitive dissonance, the amount of exposure that people have seemed to fall into as it relates to some of the nonsense that we are experiencing. And then preparing an educated workforce. If you are like me, okay, I was late to the cell phone game. Okay, I had old school, I grew up around old school folks. The amount of people that are on their cell phones in the workplace, the amount of times that we don't engage with one another because of the disassociation we kind of have, right? School is supposed to prepare us to not just interact with one another to reduce that social conflict, but it should be where we are pumping out the best of the best. I don't want to live in a country where we don't rank number one in education. That should be troubling to all of us, especially when we have the resources to fix it, right? We have the resources to fix it. Okay. One of the critiques, because again, I don't plan on being blind by certain things. One of the critiques of Horace Mann was that some of what he was constructing with the belief of the common school, it kind of marginalized immigrants in other communities. There was no advocacy for people who were deaf during the development of this stuff. But again, Horace Mann in his creation of the common school is seen as kind of the founding of our modern school system that we function under today. Now, I cannot get into every single thing and every single movement that we have experienced in our educational system, but I want to talk about one. Okay, what we know with Brown v. Board. 9-0, the Supreme Court ruled that racial segregation in public schools was unconstitutional and ended the doctrine of separate but equal. What we don't talk about, though, is the fallout of Brown versus Board. Okay. Here in the city of Columbus, the last bus that ran to desegregate schools was 1996. Brown v. Board decision was, I believe, 54. Correct me if I'm wrong. Columbus City had such an issue with desegregation that it went back to the Supreme Court, and there was another ruling in 1973 that said, yes, we need to desegregate our schools. 54, 73, 1996 is when that last bus ran. I was mind blown when I found that out. I was fortunate enough to be invited on a radio show to talk about the impact of Brown v. Board, and people couldn't believe that, nor could I, but it's the truth. Okay. But I want to talk about what happened at Brown v. Board Yes, this is beautiful. Yes, America has to open up its doors, but we know, if anything, what we've seen from last session and what we are experiencing today, anytime that there is progress that has moved us forward as a country, there is a backlash. And I don't know who coined this term, but someone said that it is the white lash of America. Too many stats to not just put this up here. Okay, I have two really wordy slides, so forgive me for that. Integration was misimplemented. Okay, I wrote an article called "The Misintegration of America" because I feel like we missed the mark. A lot of us could understand that. Excuse me. After the decision of Brown v. Board, what we don't talk about is how it led to the dismissal, demotion, and or forced resignation of tens of thousands of Black teachers and administrators across the South and the United States at large. Why? Because you have certain white school officials that are going to refuse that African Americans are going to have any authority over white staff or students. And then go so far as to replace them with less qualified white educators. Now, before I read the next one, we have to be cognizant. If we are getting rid of people that are going to take care of the people who they look like, replacing them with those that may be less qualified on paper, it's not like there was some sort of racial sensitivity training that was issued years ago in the 50s. That's more of a new school thing in terms of racial sensitivity. So think about the Black children that sit in these classrooms that are not welcomed. Think about the Ruby Bridges. Think about all of the children that are being heckled, doors shut, federal intervention having to be made just for a little body to go to school and learn. Before Brown versus Board, you had Black educators making up about 30 to 50% of teachers and principals in the segregated South. Today, only about 7% of US teachers and 11% of principals are Black. And this is 2022's data. Okay. As I was putting this together, I looked at a couple different stats. This was the most comprehensive outline of what I was looking to tell the story. Right. 4 years later, right, we understand that there is not a lot of me and a lot of other folks of color that occupy these spaces. Right. So what does that mean for the children that have to go to schools? And the decision is going to effectively start to decimate this educator pipeline of Black educators coming up out of the trenches to become teachers, leading to lots of misrepresentation that we see today. There's a situation where I know of a teacher that has said that there's no need to teach about the Civil War. We don't have time to teach about the Civil War. I don't know if the kids can handle that. Imagine not letting a child know where they came from, where their lineage might have come from, how the war happened, and then Reconstruction, where they can see themselves as congressmen and women. But this goes beyond school. Brown v. Board is good on paper. I salute Thurgood Marshall for all that he did for our people. There was harm that came from that decision because of the powers that be. A law means nothing unless it is enforced. And our leader, the director of the Institute, Dr. Scott, says that a lot, right? A law means nothing unless it is going to be enforced. We have to be the enforcement. The economic harm to Black families and communities, losing jobs. Education is a way for people to make a decent middle class life, taken away. You lose respected members of the community who are often civil rights activists and teachers. Again, not to take away from anybody in this country. America has enough for things to go around, but somehow they have been brainwashed not to believe that. And by they, I mean those that perpetuate keeping the American dream away from other people that don't look like them. Think about what that means for the Black students that had Black teachers and then are replaced, had Black administrators and then they are replaced. It happened here in Columbus City. There's a study. I'll send that out in the document for you all to read through. Okay. Role models, intellectuals that understand them, gone. The scholar, Kay Fenwick, the scholar argues that it was a moral and legal triumph but it was the white resistance and the structural racism, not the decision, that caused the following outcome or the previous outcomes that we have just talked about. And again, it shows that policy victories can produce harm when the implementation ignores the structure of racial hierarchy. It is going to take us standing up. It is going to take us using our voices. I don't want to be Dr. King. I want to follow in his footsteps to help that dream that he saw, the looking over of the mountain and seeing the promised land. I want to be a part of making that a reality. Even if I don't get to see it, I want to be able to say that I've done my job. Okay. And hopefully I can inspire anybody to join that, right? This is not about curing all of the things that have happened. But if we lay down a strong foundation for these babies, for these children to learn the truth about this country, to analyze and hold it accountable, imagine how powerful this nation will be. Imagine how powerful this nation will be. Imagine. All right. I have a video that I want to share with you. Okay. As a child, I grew up and I often would come home from the bus and Granny Goose would have on the Judge shows, right? And she would often have on Jerry Springer. Now, how does Jerry Springer find his way into a conversation like this, right? I think it is worth all of us to go back through and look at the episodes that were about the racism that was happening in this country because people were flat out saying what they believed. And this is in the early 90s. The early 90s, those people, for the most part, are still around today. I want to play this because I want us to think about education beyond the classroom. Teachers are often overburdened. I'm not placing all of the responsibility on teachers. I'm placing it on citizens. But I want to share with you about 3 minutes of this because it goes to show what happens to children that do not receive comprehensive education outside of their homes.
What do you think about blacks?
There's nothing wrong with them, but you shouldn't race mix.
But you wouldn't kill them.
No.
Kill
You
Jews?
should send them back to Africa. That's where he came from.
But you all brung us here.
No,
Brought
no,
us here.
the Jews brought you here. The Jews brought you here.
Gave you.
White Christians had nothing to do with it.
Had influence.
Well, if your four white fathers thought we was some monkeys and some dogs and stuff, why did your four white fathers rape us for my four ancestors or the rest of these four ancestors in here? Why did they rape us?
You have to monkeys. Why did you rape us? I wanted them to beat us and stuff. I wanted them to touch us.
You're gonna
But
have to
I heard
repeat that.
nobody don't touch
You're
no
gonna have to
monkey.
repeat that. I can't understand what you're saying.
What? Go ahead.
Why did you take it out on everyone? Everyone didn't do that to you.
Excuse me?
I said, why do you take it out on everyone? Everyone didn't hurt you.
Listen, I have a black friend in school. I have nothing against blacks. She has nothing against me. She understands where I'm coming from.
And where's that?
The Holy Bible, it says it right in the Bible.
Yeah.
Where do it say that, will you tell me where do it say in the encyclopedia or anywhere else that, blacks are not supposed to be in this world or anything? Tell me where is that at?
Where did...
The blacks are the beasts of the field. It says it right in your Bible.
The what?
The blacks are the beasts of the field. Why don't you pick up a Bible and start reading instead of just...
I'm Christian. I'm just like you, but I don't think it's right to be against all these people. We're all equal.
Well, you have a right to your beliefs, and I have a right to my beliefs. I didn't come here to force this in your mind. I was asked to come here to explain how I feel.
Why is it that you think that blacks are not equal to whites?
It says it right in the Bible. We're God's chosen people, and God's chosen people are better than any of them.
Wait. Who wants to
You
talk?
got criticized ready to talk.
Well, why don't you go to a black church and find out yourself?
I wouldn't step into a black church.
Excuse me, the young lady over there, you said you didn't hear. I think I'll just make that a little bit clear for you. She said that if we're such trash and all that, why did your people go and rape black women?
Black men walk down the street in
Okay.
cities like this and rape our white women.
Okay.
All right. So I'm not gonna lie, I've watched this a couple times, and the first time, like it is hard because children are innocent. And this indoctrination that we hear, right? This indoctrination that we seem to be suffering from, that people say that some are suffering from, none of what, none of that is necessary. You can have your beliefs, but when you take that out on people because of hatred, because of miseducation, that is why it is all of our jobs to not just hold our teachers accountable, right? But to hold our lawmakers accountable, because this was just 1993. I hope that those children come out of whatever it is that they were experiencing, right? And it's harmful because I can't imagine being a child in that audience hearing that stuff, right? But again, that's why education is so important. It is so important. So, what have been efforts in the past that we have seen be beneficial to challenging the structural system that just won't have a breakthrough? It seems to be fighting this breakthrough. Okay, the first example that I want to share
What do you think of
is Freedom School. Okay, Freedom School in 1964. Okay, this is going to be a summer initiative. Okay, some of you may have been involved with Freedom School. If you don't know, check out the Children's Defense Fund. Let me not get ahead of myself, but check it out. Okay, in Mississippi, you had college students that said, you know what? Because of all of this segregation, because of all of the inequities that we experience, we're going to get together and we're going to create this program and provide voting rights and educational opportunities for Black kids because their exclusion from a quality public school, right? That separate but equal doctrine, I remember having older textbooks, right? Just how fair is that? What's the point of that? Okay. Early Freedom School is going to offer academic instruction, lessons about Black history, civil rights, and civic engagement, and then developing our young folks to be independent leaders and community leaders. We need that now more than ever. We need it so desperately. It is going to be all of our jobs to make sure that we are echoing those same sentiments. Does America get worse or better if we do things like this? And I would argue better. A more educated populace is a more fruitful populace. All right. So again, there's nothing that was divisive about this. It was American. Nothing divisive about this, but it is American. It's the American thing to do. You could say, hold up what Freedom School started with and hold up what Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, and the rest of those framers were talking about. It's the same thing, minus the Black history, right? But we make strides there, right? Again, using the framers and using the founding to our advantage. So, Freedom School today. This is an image from the National Day of Social Action. Okay. Today, Freedom School focuses on summer literacy to mitigate the learning loss that happens, right? When school is out, kids usually don't have as much education opportunity as they should. But Freedom School is a great thing to do to put your kids in. I served as a Freedom School SLI for 2 years. It was great. Okay, we had real conversations. It taught me a lot. It taught the students a lot. And one of my first groups, one of my first level threes, she became an SLI and she is now a teacher herself, which is just mind blowing, right? The power of education. And they have a representative IRC curriculum. So they have books and stories that the students can relate to. That is when I was introduced to Claudette Colvin. I had never heard of Claudette Colvin until my first year doing Freedom School. So rest her soul. We read that book and the students were amazed. Like, how come they don't talk about her like Rosa Parks? And my question back to them was, how do you make sure that that doesn't happen? And maybe my former student answered that question by what she chose to do with herself. And again, this is going to demonstrate the power of education to advocate for change. We've got to we have got to position education as the catalyst. And I mean it when I say a revolution. I mean it when I say a movement. It has to come from the classroom. The Teachers March in Selma, okay? FDR, okay, not Franklin Delano Roosevelt, but Frederick Reese, Reverend Reese. He was an educator and the president of the Dallas County Voters League. He was able to get together 105 teachers to march with the intent of registering the students to vote. They marched out of an elementary school. They went down to the courthouse. And that image that you see that man holding up was the sheriff at the time sticking a billy club in his stomach. One of our educator ambassadors and members of the Educator for Democracy team, Luke Mitchner, he gives a great lecture and a great series about the Teachers March in Selma. That's his jam, and I've learned a lot from him talking about that. So I want to make sure I give him credit there for educating those of us that did not know about it. Okay, this happened in 1965. If you do not know about the Teachers March, this is going to then inspire what later happened across that bridge, that Edmund Pettus Bridge for the right to vote. If I had it my way, if I had the power to make this happen, all educators would be in Washington, D.C. on the 4th of July and be marching on Washington, demanding that we teach the truth about American history. And maybe it doesn't happen on the 4th of this year. Maybe it doesn't have to be on a specific day, but I couldn't imagine if enough of us that care about education, if enough of us that cared about education got together and marched and demanded, I can't imagine the national headlines that would get. So, other movements that have come from the classroom. Okay, you got the East LA blowouts, where Mexican students are advocating for education. We have seen the LGBTQIA plus community stage walkouts for their rights. We have seen gun violence advocates to say, or to end gun violence in schools, right? I see that the child that has, I shouldn't be afraid to go to school. It should not be a conversation. Our students should not be having level 1, 2, and 3 lockdown drills. They should be having level 1, 2, and 3 civic education and civic field trips down to the state house to say, hey, what you're doing is a policy that hurts me and my future in education. We've also seen the walkouts from climate justice, right? Because what are we going to leave the students? What are we going to leave our children years and years from now when we are no longer inhabiting this country or this earth, I should say? Yes, the abolishing ICE. We've had in last session, we talked about there were two high schools that staged protests, right? Tomorrow is supposed to be a national day of action, right? How do we have a march for education itself? How do we make education a movement within itself? I do not believe that this is a end all be all fix all, but if we can have a message about education needing all of the things that it deserves, it would put a lot of people in a corner to either choose to not advocate for fully funding our public school system and making sure that our American children, right, not just those who are citizens, but the children who are here getting an education in our system, get the best. I can't imagine people being on record saying, actually, I think that's a bad idea. Okay. So again, movements in the classroom. Now, I shared one of these clips in the beginning of our session. I'm going to share this clip with you all. There are two. I'll explain who this guy is and why I have him on the screen. But I want you to hear what is being said out of his mouth here in the state of Ohio.
What I feel like happened recently, this frustration of mine lay dormant. All of our founding fathers, when you go, the farther back you go in history and you look, our history books talked about our Christian origins, the Christian heritage here in the United States of America. But the farther we get, or the closer we get to the present, the more we see that philosophy is not just the philosophy, but the historic facts have been omitted. They have been left out. And history is being rewritten. And that leads to, I think, a lot of hate. I think it leads to violence. And I think when we look back, and this is what really stirred me is, and I hope we were all stirred, I think we all were, When we look back to that day on September the 10th, when Charlie Kirk was assassinated, Charlie Kirk was known, obviously, for being a conservative. Charlie Kirk was also known for being a Christian. And Charlie often brought to light those historical facts from our history. And people didn't like to hear that. And I think that incited hate amongst some people, and that incited violence. And I think it's time that we make sure that we just unshackle our teachers and let our teachers know.
He uses the phrase unshackle more than just that time. He's talking about unshackling our teachers from not being able to teach the truth about American history in the state of Ohio. That bill that you see at the bottom is HB 486. It recently passed out of the House committee and now it is headed to the Senate. I'm going to spend every waking breath that I have providing testimony against this bill because he, in one breath, says that we should talk about the facts of American history, and it is named after somebody that said lots of things that were wrong about American history, somebody that echoed the Great Replacement theory in terms of American history, that had bad things to say about the '64 Civil Rights Act as it related to American history. It is wrong. I will not stand for it. And I want to play the second video because this is in response to one of the sessions that I provided testimony. This is his response to someone else, but in response to my testimony.
Ahead, this is not, we're not creating the whole framework. We're addressing a problem, an issue that we had teachers in here to discuss that says that they feel like they can only teach one aspect. And there are plenty of people who, as we've already heard, they want to blame Christianity for slavery. And certainly there were some people who took the Bible out of context and did that. We don't deny that. But there were Christians who were the abolitionists. And we look at Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, who started the civil rights movement in his basement of a Baptist church. And so
he claimed that Dr. King started the civil rights movement in the basement of the Baptist church. Once he made that comment, there was a break. I caught him in the hallway and I said, "You might want to correct that for the record." And he walked up to me and he said, "Well, why don't you tell me where the civil rights movement started?" And I said back to him, "You should look at the primary and secondary sources that we hold our students to in the standard 1 of 8th grade, and you might find that." He later went on to say that I was calling Charlie Kirk a racist. He went on to say that I was trying to start a problem. So I met with him in his office a couple weeks ago, and we're having this conversation. He didn't know what redlining was, although he grew up in a less than desirable neighborhood based on the redlining map of his neighborhood. He didn't understand how that affected public schools and the impact that that has had, the lasting impact. Last but not least, as we were having this conversation, he goes in his wallet, he finds his card, and he tosses it over to me. And I was engaging, so I was listening to him, and I put the card on my notebook. And I looked down, and he flung a NAACP membership card. And the first question I asked him was, "How old is this?" Number one. But number two, I explained to him how that is not only wrong and insensitive, but that's a part of the problem. If you don't know the truth about American history, how can you legislate a piece of law that is to encourage something all in the name of political win points? I will not stand for that. So I asked a question to all
what
of
I
you. Uh-oh.
feel like,
So the question is, what's happening in your state? What can you do? I am encouraging you all to testify. I wrote an article about America's testimony. I encourage you to testify. And if doing so might be too much, maybe you don't want that public spotlight, I encourage you to at least provide written testimony because it matters. Attend your local school board meetings and ask the question, who is doing the oversight on how American history is being taught in your school, in your state? What are the students learning about the story of American history? And how will that, the one thing I agree with the representative, that's Representative Gary Click is his name. If we don't talk about the history of this country, it will lead to violence, i.e. the Civil War. what we are experiencing now. Go to your local school board meetings, attend the committee hearings about education in your states. We have to hold these people accountable. The levers of democracy are there. We got to pull them, and we got to pull it together. I wanted to share a piece of testimony from a fellow educator. I'm not going to take credit for inspiring anything. She made the decision to go testify, and I want to play a little bit of what some of her testimony was as she did this. And this is in Spokane, Washington.
And I'd like to speak specifically on Juneteenth as a key moment in American history for all of us. So I start my workday every day hearing the Pledge of Allegiance recited on the intercom. And this gives me a space to reflect on the ideals that we as a nation choose to tell our children about who we are and what we value. One nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Juneteenth is the only holiday that we have that truly commemorates liberty for all. 4th of July celebrates the freedom from tyranny that revolutionaries experienced in 1776. But it would be almost a century before liberty for all made it to the final rebel state, informing the end of slavery. Juneteenth commemorates this meaningful Freedom Day by acknowledging this history with a holiday that people celebrated for 150 years before finally being recognized as a national holiday. With this holiday, we strengthen the goal of liberty for all, and we honor the stories, both known and unknown, of the hope and the fight from countless individuals and families that sacrifice for the cause for liberty for all.
Kendra and I shared a moment on the way to Memphis, Tennessee as the second leg of the learning tours. And I shared that my 3 times great-grandfather fought in the Civil War. She shared that her 3 times great-grandfather went from the East Coast all the way to Kansas to fight the good fight, the Kansas and Nebraska Act. He wanted to be a part of that because he couldn't stand idly by, right? And I shared with her, imagine our grandfathers, wherever they are, looking down on the 2 of us coming together to stand up for what's right. Now, I had 2 really good friends that I went to college with that became teachers. They were 2 white women, and I told them the most powerful thing that you can do is use your voice to students of color to show them that you care, and then do something with that voice. I'm going to play just a clip of my testimony as I was testifying against this bill, HB 486, and then we'll head to close and wrap up.
We keep using that phrase, and I would encourage us to think about what shackles really mean in terms of the United States history. My issue is that we are living in a moment of history right now. America is at a crossroads. This bill talks about the positives of Christianity in the name of Mr. Kirk. He is on the record saying, if I see a black pilot, I'm going to be like, boy, I hope he's qualified. He's called Dr. King awful, and he is cited in this bill. He led attacks on DEI, and I am a product of being included in this country's story because of the history and exclusion that my grandmother suffered from. Today, I ask us to really think, if we are talking about a true and honest picture of American history, then let us tell it all, and let us leave politics out of history, because it happened already. It happened already. When we try to influence history with ideology, we continue to go down this road where I have to ask or answer a question to my son about someone who shared divisive rhetoric, which is not very patriotic. I have to answer that question. And I put forth to him the facts and the things that have been said by Charlie Kirk. And he looked at me and asked the same question I'm going to ask you all. Then why are they doing this, Daddy? Why are we doing this? With that, I ask. We keep.
How did this lecture even come to be? I see Carmen Cruz is on the call. She's another third of the Educator for Democracy team. I talk about patriotism a lot. I'm sure I probably get on the nerves of some when I talk about it. But this lecture is birthed from a conversation about what it means to be an American today. This lecture came about because of a conversation of educators sharing their journey about how school and education has impacted us. Why should we want to reclaim patriotism? Well, it's a challenge. It is a challenge to see what really is the makeup of this country. It is going to be us that care enough about these kids, that care enough about the future, that care enough about the ideals that were outlined in the Constitution and Declaration of Independence, whether it was the original draft or whether the one that made it, that is famous today. It is us that care about all of us, liberty and justice for all. It is us that have the power. It's a matter of what we choose to do. And as I've started doing some online content, I've done a couple videos on Instagram and other platforms, just trying to use my voice to do something, right? I'm not just going to go down to the state house, but I also am going to follow that up with the online content that I do. And I've ended with this catchphrase, right? Change only happens by the decisions that you make. And I could not think of a better phrase to end this lecture on. The only change that is going to happen is because of what you choose to do with your voice, with your power, with your time, with your community, with your loved ones, and it not be just for you, but for the rest of the country. America is a heck of a place to live. Our story is so complicated, it's so intricate. But if we tell it in a way that gives us the power to reclaim what it means to be a patriot in today and then forever, I think we will reach the ideals of this country and be the most unstoppable force that we have ever seen. Everybody, I thank you so much for joining and logging in and registering and being a part of this. This means a lot, not just to me, but to the future of the country. I'm going to end it there. Thank you so much. And then I'll drop a couple links here at the end. And if anybody wants to have a conversation or, drop your thoughts and whatnot, we can do that. But again, thank you so much for attending Reclaiming Patriotism. And again, change only happens by the decisions that you make.